What would you do if your heartbroken neighbor knocked on your door in tears and whispered, "Please, don't leave me alone tonight"? One ordinary evening changed a single father's life forever in ways he never expected. Stay until the end for an unforgettable twist, and if you enjoy emotional stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Mark Reynolds had been raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Austin, Texas. His days were long, but his evenings were sacred. After work, he cooked simple dinners, helped Lily with homework, listened to her little stories, and ended each night with a bedtime book. The house was not fancy, but it was peaceful. Mark had worked hard to build that peace after losing his wife years earlier. He believed children needed safety more than perfection, so every night, he made sure Lily slept knowing she was loved, protected, and never alone in the world. That Friday evening began like any other, except for the rain tapping harder than usual against the windows. The sky over the neighborhood was dark, and the streetlights reflected in shining puddles along the road. Lily had already brushed her teeth and was choosing between 2 storybooks. Mark was checking the front door lock before turning off the porch light. The house smelled faintly of soup and fresh laundry. Everything felt calm, almost ordinary. Then, suddenly, a desperate knock struck the door. It was not the polite knock of a visitor. It sounded frightened, rushed, and full of panic. Mark froze for a second, his hand still on the lock. Lily looked up from the hallway, her eyes wide. "Daddy," she whispered. Mark gently raised one hand, telling her to stay back. Another knock came, louder this time, followed by a shaky voice, calling his name. He recognized it immediately. It was Emily Carter, his next-door neighbor. She usually sounded cheerful whenever they met near the mailbox or spoke across the fence. But tonight, her voice was broken. Mark opened the door quickly, and the sight before him made his chest tighten. Emily stood there soaked, trembling, and barely breathing. Rain ran down Emily's hair and face, mixing with dark streaks of mascara beneath her eyes. Her dress was damp, her arms folded tightly around herself as if she were trying to hold her whole body together. She looked over her shoulder toward the street before stepping closer to the doorway. Mark noticed fear in her eyes, the kind people cannot fake. She tried to speak, but her lips shook. For a moment, no words came out. Mark lowered his voice and said, "Emily, what happened?" She swallowed hard, then whispered, "Please, don't leave me alone tonight." Mark did not ask unnecessary questions. He understood that some moments required kindness before explanations. He opened the door wider and said, "Come inside. You're safe here." Emily stepped into the warm hallway, still shaking from cold and fear. Lily stood near the stairs clutching her book, confused but silent. Mark gave her a calm look, the kind that told her everything would be okay. He took a towel from the laundry basket and handed it to Emily. She tried to thank him, but her voice broke again. Mark simply said, "You don't have to explain right now." Emily sat on the edge of the couch, her hands locked together so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Mark placed a blanket around her shoulders and went to the kitchen for water. Lily slowly walked closer, still holding her bedtime book against her chest. She looked at Emily with innocent concern and asked, "Are you cold?" Emily looked at the little girl, and for the first time since entering the house, her expression softened. She nodded slightly. Lily ran upstairs and returned with her favorite pink blanket. Without saying much, she placed it beside Emily. That small gesture nearly made Emily cry again. Mark watched his daughter's kindness with a quiet ache in his heart. He had always tried to teach Lily compassion, but seeing it appear naturally reminded him of how powerful gentleness could be. He set a glass of water on the coffee table and sat in a chair across from Emily, giving her space. Outside, the rain continued falling, tapping against the windows like nervous fingers. Emily stared at the floor for a long time before finally speaking. She said the date had started normally, with dinner at a restaurant downtown. At first, the men seemed charming, respectful, and interested. But as the evening went on, his behavior changed. He became controlling, asking personal questions, making rude comments, and growing angry when Emily refused to continue the night with him. She tried to leave calmly, but he followed her to the parking lot and accused her of embarrassing him. Emily managed to get into her car and drive home, but she feared he might have followed her. That fear had driven her straight to Mark's door. She said she did not know why she came to him, only that his house always felt safe from the outside. Mark listened carefully, without interrupting or judging her choices. He knew fear could make people doubt themselves, so he spoke gently. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. "No one has the right to scare you." Emily closed her eyes, breathing slowly as his words settled in. Lily sat quietly beside her father, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Mark checked the porch, locked the door again, and made sure the curtains were closed. He offered to call someone she trusted, but Emily shook her head. For now, she only wanted a safe place to sit. As the night deepened, the house became quiet again, but it was no longer an ordinary quiet. It was the kind of quiet that follows fear, when everyone is waiting for the heart to slow down. Emily held Lily's blanket in her lap and whispered that she felt embarrassed for being so scared. Mark shook his head. "Being scared doesn't make you weak," he said. "It means something felt wrong, and you listened to yourself." Emily looked at him with tired eyes, realizing he was not trying to impress her or take advantage of her vulnerability. He was simply helping. Near midnight, Lily fell asleep on the couch, her head resting against a cushion. Mark carefully covered her with another blanket, then returned to the chair near Emily. She looked around the living room, the family photos, the scattered crayons, the half-finished puzzle on the table, and felt a warmth she had not expected. This was not a perfect home, but it was honest. For the first time that night, she stopped shaking. Mark noticed and smiled softly. Neither of them said much after that. But in that quiet room, under the sound of rain, something important began: trust. Mark returned from the kitchen carrying a steaming mug of coffee, setting it gently on the table in front of Emily. The warm aroma filled the quiet living room, offering a small sense of comfort after the frightening evening she had endured. He spoke softly, telling her there was no pressure to explain anything until she felt ready. Before sitting down, he walked through the house one more time, checking every window, locking the back door, and turning on the porch light. When he came back, Emily noticed the careful way he protected his home. For the first time since leaving the restaurant, she began to believe she was finally safe. Emily wrapped both hands around the warm mug, feeling the heat slowly chase away the chill that had settled deep inside her. She had not realized how badly she had been shaking until now. Across the room, Lily quietly watched from the couch, sensing that the grown-ups were carrying a heavy conversation. Without saying anything, she disappeared upstairs for a moment. Emily looked down at the coffee, trying to gather the courage to speak. The silence in the house felt different from the silence outside. Here, it was peaceful instead of frightening, allowing her breathing to become slower with every passing minute. A few moments later, Lily returned carrying her favorite pink blanket, the one she refused to sleep without. She walked straight to Emily and carefully placed it over her shoulders. "This always makes me feel safe," she said with an innocent smile. Emily looked at the little girl, completely overwhelmed by such a simple act of kindness. Tears filled her eyes once again, but these tears were different. They came from relief instead of fear. She gently thanked Lily, who smiled shyly before sitting beside her father. Mark watched the exchange quietly, proud that compassion had become part of his daughter's nature. The warmth of the blanket reminded Emily of happier days before life had become filled with disappointment and broken trust. She had moved into the neighborhood nearly 2 years earlier. After ending a difficult relationship, hoping for a fresh start, she had focused on work, avoided unnecessary drama, and slowly rebuilt her confidence. When friends encouraged her to start dating again, she finally agreed, believing enough time had passed. Tonight had been her first real date in months. She had convinced herself that maybe life was finally moving forward. Instead, everything had fallen apart within a single evening. Emily slowly explained how the evening had started perfectly. The men had been polite during dinner, asking about her career, laughing at her jokes, and speaking confidently about the future. She admitted she had even begun imagining that perhaps this meeting would become something meaningful. But after dinner, his personality shifted. He became controlling, questioning why she answered messages slowly. criticizing her choices and insisting they continue the evening somewhere private. When Emily politely declined, his smile disappeared. His words became harsh, and his patience vanished completely, leaving her frightened by the sudden change in his behavior. She described how he followed her into the parking lot, refusing to accept her decision. He repeatedly demanded another chance, stepping closer every time she tried to create distance between them. Although he never physically touched her, his angry voice and threatening attitude left her terrified. Emily managed to unlock her car just before he reached the driver's door. She drove away with shaking hands, constantly checking her mirrors because she feared he might be following her. Even after reaching her neighborhood, she remained too frightened to enter her own empty house alone. That fear led her directly to Mark's front porch. Mark listened carefully without interrupting. He knew that sometimes the greatest comfort came from simply allowing someone to be heard. After Emily finished speaking, he leaned forward slightly and said, "You did absolutely nothing wrong. You trusted your instincts, and that probably protected you tonight." Emily lowered her eyes, admitting she had spent the entire drive blaming herself for agreeing to the date. Mark gently shook his head. The responsibility belongs to the person who chose intimidation, not to the person who chose safety. Those words seemed to lift a burden Emily had been carrying since leaving the restaurant. The room remained quiet for several minutes as the rain continued falling outside. Lily eventually rested her head against the couch, listening without fully understanding everything being said. Mark stood up and switched on a small lamp, filling the room with a warmer light. The harsh shadows disappeared, making the house feel even more welcoming. Emily noticed family photographs lining the shelves, birthday celebrations, camping trips, school pictures, and smiling memories captured over the years. There was something comforting about seeing ordinary happiness. It reminded her that peaceful lives still existed despite the painful experiences people sometimes carried. As midnight approached, Mark suggested that Emily stay in the guest room instead of returning home. At first she hesitated, worried she might become a burden. Mark smiled kindly and reminded her that neighbors looked after each other. Lily, already half asleep, quietly added, "Daddy always says good people help each other." Hearing those words from a child touched Emily more deeply than she expected. She accepted the offer with quiet gratitude. Mark prepared fresh sheets, placed an extra blanket on the bed, and assured her that if she needed anything during the night, she only had to call. Before heading to the guest room, Emily paused in the hallway and looked back toward the living room. Mark was gently carrying Lily upstairs, careful not to wake her. Watching that simple moment between father and daughter filled Emily with emotions she could hardly describe. She realized the kindness she had experienced that evening had not been extraordinary for Mark. It was simply the way he chose to live. That realization stayed with her long after she closed the guest room door. Although the fear had not completely disappeared, hope had quietly taken its place. Neither of them realized it yet, but that rainy night had planted the first seed of a friendship built on trust, respect, healing, and genuine human compassion.